Hey there, Morbid Maniacs! It's time for another spooky video. And for tonight's spooky video, I'm going to be talking about the Enfield Haunting. I'm kind of making a little Conjuring universe type of series here on my channel. Last week I did the story of Annabelle, and this week I'm going to be talking about the story that they sort of based the Conjuring 2 off of. So I hope you guys enjoy. The Enfield story began in 1977 and it involved the Hodgson family. Mother Peggy, daughters Margaret, who was 13, Janet, who was 11, sons Johnny, who was 10, and Billy, who was 7. It mainly revolved around the youngest daughter, Janet. They lived in a semi-detached council house in Enfield, UK. Peggy was a divorcee and was struggling to keep her family afloat. The first paranormal event that had took place in their home was when Mrs. Hodgson and John were lying in bed when they heard this shuffling noise. Mrs. Hodgson walked into the girls' bedroom and told them to keep it down. She felt as though the girls were playing a prank on her. Janet had said that the chair in the bedroom was the source for all of these noises, and so irritated, Mrs. Hodgson took this chair and placed it downstairs. She turned off the light and the noises began again. She turned it back on and they stopped. The girls were apparently in their bed, not moving, and these noises were described as someone walking across the floor in slippers. Then came the knocking, and suddenly a chest of drawers moved out into the floor, in the middle of the floor, on its own. They all stared at this chest, just kind of wondering what the heck was going on, and Mrs. Hodgson pushed it back into place, at which point it slid back out into the center of the floor, and Mrs. Hodgson tried to push it back into place again for it not to even budge. When this happened, it frightened her, and so she told all of her children to meet her downstairs, and they ran over to their neighbor's house. Their neighbors, the Nottinghams, walked them back over to their house, not thinking anything of it, at which point they started hearing more unexplained noises such as bangs and knocks all around different areas of their house. They searched all around the house and they could find no source for these noises, and so they called the police. And after the police had investigated the Enfield home, once again they found no source for these noises. Over the next few days, Legos and glass marbles were being thrown all around the house. This was witnessed by both the Hodgsons and the Nottinghams, and the father of the Nottinghams had actually said that he picked up one of these glass marbles and it was hot to the touch. Not really sure of what to do next, the Nottingham mother had actually called the national newspaper, hoping to get some sort of help. Journalist Douglas Binney and photographer Graham Morris visited the home the next day. They themselves had witnessed these Lego pieces flying around the room, and Graham Morris actually got hit in the forehead with one of them, which apparently caused bruising which lasted for a couple of days. They returned to the newspaper convinced that this house was haunted. And then senior reporter George Fallows and David Thorpe visited on September 7th. Once he had heard this knocking for himself, Fallows had actually contacted the Society of Psychical Research. In a month, more objects were being moved and thrown about their home. pillows, knives, anything that was not nailed down. All of these things were continuously disrupting different rooms in their house. Most of the equipment that the investigation team had whenever they entered the home started malfunctioning, even though before they entered the home it was working just fine. On an experiment, they decided to move all of the furniture and items out of the girl's bedroom, only to hear a vibrating noise coming from the bedroom, which was now empty. They returned to see that the fireplace was completely ripped out. It was an old Victorian cast iron fireplace which weighed 60 pounds. There was no way that those young girls or the kids in general could have moved that. But whatever the case, the pipes to the fireplace were completely torn in half. So Morris Gross and Guy Leon Playfair were convinced that these events were paranormal. There were some members of their team who were not so convinced. But it was also found that Janet had a hidden tape recorder and was also videotaped bending spoons. The investigators believed that most of the events that took place in this home were genuine and real, but they do think that Janet may have exaggerated just a little bit on certain things. Each time the girls were found faking anything, they had admitted to it. One of the investigators claimed that Bill, one of the voices that Janet usually spoke in, had some of the tics and traits that Janet did. At one point, Gross had actually stated that these noises were getting more intelligent and could respond. They started asking it questions and told the entity to knock once for no and twice for yes. When they asked if it was dead, the entity knocked over 53 times. As another month had passed, Janet's behavior grew more strange, and she started to become even more unsettled. It was almost as if something were taking over her. The doctor was called one night because of her outburst, and she was injected with 10 milligrams of Valium. It put her to sleep, but a half an hour later, the investigators were startled by a crashing noise upstairs. When they checked, they had found Janet standing on a dresser, kneeling on top of a wide clock, still asleep. She was apparently thrown 14 feet across the room. It was either her or the clock. I don't know. I didn't really get a good idea when I was doing my research. A lot of the paranormal events that took place inside of the Enfield home were caught on film. It started with a pillow which appeared to be twisting by itself in midair. And then it was a curtain that seemed to start twisting on its own. Most extreme photos, however, were those of Janet. They caught several photos of Janet apparently levitating in midair. Janet began growling and barking along with whistling. They began asking her questions, and a rough, male-like voice started responding. The voice referred to itself as Bill. The voice of Bill was heard on several occasions. Some are a little skeptical of this voice and believe that it was actually placed in Janet's head, but I actually had listened to the recordings myself, and I just don't see how an 11-year-old girl would have the ability to have a voice like that come out of her. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just don't feel like a child could, a girl nonetheless, a child, like, could have the power, the ability to speak in such a tone. But that's just me. Something that was unexplained was that Janet somehow knew that Bill had passed away of a hemorrhage in an armchair in the living room of the house. And months later, this was confirmed by his son, Terry Wilkins. The investigators put water into Janet's mouth and a strip of tape as an experiment, but this voice still spoke. A physicist indicated that she was not using like her main vocal cords. She was using her false vocal cords to make this voice come about. And if a person was to use these false vocal cords for a long period of time, they would either get a really sore throat or they would be faced with long-term injury from it. Janet would speak for hours on end in this voice, and then she would return to her normal voice, which seemed to not have suffered at all. The events continued until July of 1978. Janet was admitted to Maudsley Hospital and was placed in extensive psychiatric testing. 2 months later, she was given a clean bill of health. She had no sign of any mental illness or illness in general which could have explained the way that she had been acting months before. When they had returned home, the disturbances seemed to calm down. So this is something that I found quite interesting. I believe that Janet herself had actually did a few interviews after she had grown up and stuff. She's now 45 years old, or she was whenever she did this interview. And she had claimed that she was being bullied after all these incidents and this haunting started to occur at her school. And people were starting to call her Ghost Girl. And how this haunting actually came about was that she was messing around with a Ouija board not long before these hauntings started to happen. She also said that she had been unaware that she was going into like these trance-like states until she looked at those photographs. Furniture turning over, cups filled with water, fires igniting, voices, levitation. Janet recalled of the time while speaking to ITV. The most frightening encounter was when a curtain wrapped itself around my neck next to my bed. A number of additional paranormal investigators had also visited the home, including demonologist Ed and Lorraine Warren. Though the film seems to make their time at the Enfield home a lot longer than what they stayed, they were still involved with the case. And they publicly stated that they were convinced that these events that were happening in the Enfield home was supernatural. So that was the story of the Enfield haunting. What do you guys think? Do you believe the story is real? I heard a lot of people kind of were skeptical about it a little bit, and because of some interviews that they had actually done when Janet and Margaret were young, like as they were in the midst of all of this, it did kind of make me just a little bit skeptical, like if it was real or not, because where they faked certain things. But one thing I would like to say is no one can tell you that something that you have experienced is fake if they've never seen it for themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, the only person who can determine if it was real or not, or who knows if it's real or not, is you. That's my opinion. So I don't know if it's real or not, but I did see an interview of Janet once she was older. You know, she's an adult. And there was this lady that was speaking and saying that she didn't believe the haunting was real. And you could tell that Janet got upset by this and was like, you weren't there, you didn't experience what I did. So I can say I've experienced some pretty weird stuff in my lifetime, and I'm sure people have thought that I was faking it, which I would honest to God never do. Let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a big old thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you have not already, and become a morbid maniac. And I will see you guys in my next video.